Welcome to Creative Tien channel. Today I want to show you a stitch that has a very interesting texture. First, I'm going to show you how I knit it by hand. Here you can see I use a garter stitch background, and this pattern is actually reversible. If I use a garter stitch background, you can see it looks exactly the same on the front side and the back side. I'm not sure the name of this stitch. I just call it textured flower. And this one is 5 stitch. The smaller one is 3 stitch for each flower. And with a stitch like that, you can easily make a scarf. If you add one more repeat here, instead of 2, you have 3 big flowers and make it long enough. At the end, you can just add a few fringe if you want, or just leave it like that. And this part here is with the plain stockinette stitch background. So the front side has a knit stitch and the back side has a purl. And I think both sides look good because the pattern kind of stand out from either of the background. And first you need a few rows of the plain stockinette stitch. And depends on your design, you can make it bigger or smaller. And I will go with a 5 stitch flower, so the row number will be around 5. Or if you want it taller, you can have 6, 7 or more rows. Now I need enough rows here. We can start to knit the pattern stitch because we are going to go several rows down. That's why we need a few rows of plain knitting. And you can decide the spacing of the stitch. I have 4 stitches on each side and the 4 stitches in between. And the pattern stitch is actually 5 stitches. So we start with 4 knitted stitches. And then we'll start our pattern. And since it's the 5 stitches, I'm going to pick the 3rd one in the middle and go down. You can decide how many rows you want to go down, but because it's 5 stitches, I wanted at least 5 rows or 6 or 7 rows down, so it's not too squished. But it's up to you how long you want your flowers to be. I'm going to the 6th stitch down from the 3rd stitch. And just insert the needle and knit. And you can pull out the stitch a little bit, so make sure we have enough length to knit it to the next stitch. And now you have 2 options. You can place this stitch back to the left side and then knit together, or you can just knit the next stitch and slip the long stitch over. And we just do the same for all the 5 stitches. Now we have 1, we do the 2nd one, insert to the same hole. And I will knit the next stitch and slide the last one over. That's 2 stitches down. And then the 3rd stitch, the same, pull out a little bit, knit the next stitch, slide over. Now we have 3 stitches, 2 more. And 1 more. Now we complete the 5 stitches, and we can just continue knitting the same 4 more knit stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we come to the next pattern. the third stitch and go down 6 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. Insert it. 1. Pull out yarn so it's a little bit longer. And for this one, I can place this yarn back to the left side and see how different these two are. 1, and we keep repeating the second one. Place to the left needle. Place to the left needle and knit 2 together. One more stitch. That's the 5 stitches. So when you place the right yarn to the left needle, you see there's a little bit more of a small loop here. And this one doesn't seem to have it. This is the one when you knit the next stitch and just slide that long stitch over. So it depends on your preference. You can decide which technique to use. And the next few rows will just be repeating the plain knitting until it's long enough, and you can do another 2 of the textured stitches. So we do the purl stitch on the back side and knit a stitch in the front to create that stockinette stitch. So this part you knit it the same way, it's just with the garter stitch. That means you knit on both sides when you knit back and forth. So it looks exactly the same on both sides. Now let's do it with a knitting machine. I'm using the LK150 and I use worsted weight yarn. Tension 8 or 7 on the mast and 8 on the carriage. And I just have regular E-rub, and I want to show you the stitch locations. I'm keeping it a 5 stitch pattern, so I space out every 5 stitches in the center and 3 stitches on the outside. So totally I have 31 stitches, 16 stitch right to the 15 stitch left. But of course you can adjust it any way you want. So just start with a few plain knitting until it's long enough to knit our stitches. Now I knit long enough, we can start to do the textured stitch. And as I showed you before, I start with the 4th stitch. And for this row, we are just going to knit by hand. So we take the yarn off the carriage. You can start from either the right side or the left side, but it seems easier for me to start from the right side. So the first 3 stitches are just plain knitting, and I will just place the yarn in the hook and pull it back. That's 1 stitch knit. And the second one, make sure the latch is open and then pull it back. And we need to have the next 5 stitch to be the textured flower stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to use a crochet hook to pick the yarns. I will start from the 3rd stitch, the middle stitch, and the 6th stitch down. So it's the 6 holes below. And if you want it longer, you can go down even more. So this is the 3rd needle. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a stitch. And I grab the yarn from below and pull to the front. I pull the yarn from below to the front and then place on the 1st needle. Make sure it's not too tight or too loose, and we knit this stitch. And we do the same. We go back to the same hole and grab the yarn. And place onto the latch of the second needle and hand knit the stitch back. And we'll do 3 more stitches to complete the pattern. Now we create our first texture stitch, and then we will do 5 stitches of the plain knitting, and then we do another textured flower stitch. So we are doing the 5 stitches here. We find out the center stitch, go down about 6 rows, and poke our crochet hook to the right side of the first needle. Grab the yarn, pull it through, and then place a loop on the first needle and hand knit it back. So push out all needles before you knit the next row. Move your carriage from the right side to the left, or the left to the right, depends on where you are, and thread the yarn back, and we can continue knitting a few rows. And let's do 10 rows for now. I need 11 rows because I like the carriage on the right side. This is a texture we just created, the 3 flowers. If you look at the back side, it has the same texture, just different background. And now we'll continue doing another texture stitch by going down 6 rows and pick up the stitches. So let's take the yarn out of the carriage because we are going to hand knit this row. The first 3 stitches are just the plain knitting. So place a yarn in the hook and the original yarn behind the hook and pull it back. Place a yarn in the hook, pull back. And the next 5 stitch will be the texture stitch. I can pull out a little bit. You can see the center one, it's a 3rd stitch, and we are going to go down 6 rows or more if you like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. And come up from the right side of the first needle. And grab the yarn. Here we have our first loop, and place the loop back to the first needle so we can hand knit this stitch. Just pull it back. We need 1 stitch, and we'll repeat the same for the 4 more stitches. So we poke to the same hole and come out on the 2nd stitch, the right side of the 2nd stitch, and grab the yarn, come out of the hole and place a loop back to the latch and hand knit this stitch. Place a loop to the latch and hand knit it back. Now we're done with the 5 stitch, and the next one we will continue hand knit another 5 stitch. And it might look a little bit strange because we have to cross the 5th stitch, but it's okay, we can do that. Just pull out the next stitch, place this in the latch and push it back, hand knit 1 stitch, and then the 2nd, 4, 5, Now we'll do the same thing again for the next 5 stitches. Sometimes it's easier to use a latch tool because it has a hook, you can close it. So when you hook the yarns, you can close the latch and you don't lose it. And this is what it looks like in the back side. You can see the hand knitted row has a little bit different tension. So that's something I have to work on to make it the same tension. Otherwise, it's a very straightforward project. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching and see you next week.